Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you might be. I am Nicole BC, and you know everything. Hello, hello. I have the AC on right now. It's funny. I have been doing lots of research as the land of the social medias and the podcasting and the AIs take over all of the things. And I probably shouldn't start these episodes with like life updates and what have you. But here we are, bucking the trends, fucking the algorithm. I feel like that's on brand for me. Anywho, thank you for being here. Welcome back to our Creative Disruptors Summer Series. This one is all about musicians because that's where I came from. But I am teasing out the idea of doing more of these. It seems like y'all are really enjoying them. I'm getting some really interesting suggestions that will be teased out throughout this series. But today, we're going to get right into it because this will be a long episode since I have so much to say about this artist. I personally think this is one of the top 10 artists 100% of my lifetime. Obviously, there's been a lot of artists that have come and gone. So to say that this is like one of the best ever, it's a big call, but I'll make it. I can remember the very first time I heard this band on the radio. Yes. From the 1900s. I can remember the kids like fighting over their songs and which ones were their favorite on the school bus. I can remember the first time I actually went to Tower Records and bought their CD and put it on in my own bedroom on my own stereo. It was my parents' stereo that I commandeered and turned it up so loud. I literally jumped out of my seat when the initial sounds, the dulcimer tones of a dog barking, "I love you," if you know, you know, sang out. And I continue to be absolutely obsessed with this band, these artists. And I think you're going to figure out why, because they have done some really cool, really disruptive, really innovative things, from not only just defying a genre, but to creating an entire creative microcosm. I hope you're screaming at me right now, yelling the Beastie Boys, because they are the perfect pick for a longer, deeper dive into this creative disruptor series. These three Jewish punks from New York City didn't just break genre. They built a blueprint for creator-led empires, independent spirits, and cultural disruption that still holds up decades later. They weren't just rebels, my friend. They were early adopters of DIY infrastructure, self-produced content, creative ownership, and cross-genre market engineering. Say that one fast. License to build. What would the Beastie Boys do? Is going to be the focal point for this particular episode. Think punk meets hip hop meets creative economy. And quite frankly, I think these boys really just paved the way for so many of us who didn't think, you know, I was going to say white guys could make hip hop, let's say credible hip hop, or punks couldn't be productive, or creatives couldn't make money. I mean, it was just a wild ride for all of these guys. And I can, well, yeah, I've been obsessed for as long as I can remember. I was just thinking about how we used to like quote unquote kidnap each other in high school and junior high. We would get the helps of our moms for that. But when it was someone's birthday, we would, you know, sort of run into their house, kidnap them, like take them to Denny's, you know, and we'd all be in our PJs and it would be super fun and crazy. And what we kidnapped, one of my girlfriends had made a Mike D Barbie doll, so it turned their Ken into Mike D. And on Mike D's birthday, we kidnapped this Barbie doll and then took a Polaroid picture of him and held him for ransom. And I can't even remember what it was, but she was, you know, delightfully horrified, and it was pretty fun. And I'm pretty sure she never got Mike D back. I don't actually remember what happened to Mike D. He probably sat on someone's dashboard of their car until, who knows, someone else kidnapped him. So anywho, big fan. Why are we talking about the Beastie Boys today? They rebranded failure into cultural dominance. They used humor, irreverence, and art school energy as a business strategy. They created a multi-decade DIY media company disguised as a band. They showed up early to creator ownership and vertical integration. So they figured out really quickly if they were going to even survive and sustain as artists, they needed to own their material. They started labels, they started video production companies, they started zines, merchandising companies, production companies. I mean, they went all in. The whole time maintaining their ethics, their activism, and their humility. And they never lost control of themselves, of their art, and of their vision. They set the stage for how wild it was that three punks truly made some of the most important hip hop albums of the late 80s and 90s. Some might even say the heyday of hip hop, because White Castle fries only come in one size. And that business advice feels about the same. Never shrink to fit, never tone it down, never stick to your lane. At least that's what the Beastie Boys would say, right? Because they never fit in one genre or one category or under one label. So they never toned it down. They never stayed in one lane. They didn't just break genre. They built entirely new systems, media empires, creative compounds, cultural ecosystems. And they did it with thrift store samples. Like, look out, Macklemore, right? This art school ethos, this DIY punk as fuck vision, and this relentless refusal to be anything but themselves gave us the Beastie Boys. So yeah, this is how three Jewish punks became a business case study in autonomy, longevity, and creative disruption. So let's kind of start with some of their history, right? In 1986, think about being white, Jewish, punk, 19 years old, and your rap album just hit number one on the Billboard 200, not the hip hop charts, the charts. Licensed to Ill was everywhere, and everyone thought that the Beastie Boys were a joke, frat rap, a parody, a one album accident. They left their label not necessarily by choice. They'd actually gotten into a massive fight with one of my spirit animals, Rick Rubin. They had a major falling out, and they kind of disappeared after that. And then in 1989, they released Paul's Boutique, a sonic collage so dense, so weird, so ahead of its time that it tanked. And I can remember this album coming out and not getting it. I mean, I was like 10 years old at the time, to truly date myself. There was no lyrics. It felt like jazz music. It didn't feel like anything I understood or recognized, let alone like their previous album. And yet today, it is considered one of the top albums of all time. Rolling Stone called it the Sgt. Pepper of hip hop. So despite getting dropped, despite a major falling out with some of the most influential industry people in hip hop at the time, the Beastie Boys disappeared and came back with an actual sampling masterpiece. I'll share Trader Joe's. It's a SoundCloud link to every single sample. My friend who did the intro music and he had originally done the intro and outro music. He's done that for the last 4 years for this podcast. I have a different friend whose song is the outro right now because I think it's very relevant and I love the track. But I'm just trying to figure out which artist name my friend, he was interviewed here as well. Anywho, I'll put the playlist for the Beastie Boys samples that he created during the pandemic in the show notes. That was just random. If I forget to do this, Shannon, remind me. Okay. Good chat, everybody. But Paul's Boutique was a sampling masterpiece that flopped commercially at first and is now considered one of the greatest albums of all time. That's how they responded to commercial failure. Do not pivot based on public reaction. Pivot based on internal evolution. So what would the Beastie Boys do? They'd make something so weird, so risky, it wouldn't be understood until years later. That's called sustainability. That's long-term brand play. Disappear, retool, and come back on purpose. Do it your way. There is no other way. That's what the Beastie Boys would do. So how do you push through when your label doesn't get it? When no one wants your new sound? You do it yourself. You make your own label. You start your own magazine. You use your own studio. You create not just a production suite, but a production palace where everybody who is on the cutting edge, who is looking to create this entire ecosystem of creativity that feels like someone you could work with, that you could create with, that you could storyboard with, right? And bounce ideas off of, you create a third space where you can all coexist and co-create together. The Beastie Boys became a content stack before that term ever existed. They weren't just artists or operators or curators or even owners. They were this 360-degree opportunity. They founded Ground Royal Records in 1992. They published Grand Royal Magazine, a cult print publication that shaped 90s underground aesthetics. What's the magazine that I think really, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to think of Vice. I don't know that Vice would have existed without Grand Royal Magazine. Also a bold call at me. They built their own studio called Oscilloscope Labs, and that enabled them to maintain full control. They didn't have to answer to anybody. They didn't have to incorporate anyone's feedback. Then after that studio, they launched Oscilloscope Pictures, an independent film company distributing award-winning documentaries and indie films. They became their own supply chain, recording, producing, distributing, curating. They were a culture. They became the phenomenon. So what would the Beastie Boys do? They would build the infrastructure to create the art because this system doesn't know what to do with it. Make your own way. Acquire the tools, the skills, and the methodology to get your art out. And you can do it your way, however you want, whenever you want. So yeah, they'd get the camera, the mic, the press pass, the label, and then sell a limited zine, making it all look like it was something so much more intentional and impactful than it was in order to create that impact and that perceived intention. It was like they were constantly playing with that concept of the chicken or the egg. And I always, if you hear me ever talk shit about the music industry, it's the smoke and mirrors of it, right? Like when I very first, air quotes, retired, it was really hard for me to watch like music documentaries and even go to gigs because I just was so painfully aware of what happens when you pull back the veil or the curtains and you can see behind the set and you understand what's happening beneath the scene. And it's completely make-believe. Like you are literally making people believe. But once you have a certain threshold realized in terms of belief, you're dealing with like this egregore, right? Where it becomes real because they believe. And so the smoke and mirrors, it was listening to this one particular band talk about this song that they had written that I think I've told this story before. I knew that song just came from a very like happenstance imagining on a bus, but it was interpreted by fans as this incredibly powerful, poignant love story. Okay, cool. I struggled with that kind of what felt like inconsistency or like a lie, right? But it's artists like the Beastie Boys that remind me it all gets to be open to interpretation. And that's what's so magical about music and about art. So the Beastie Boys, they created fake advertisements in their magazines. Now, did consumers and people, you see ads by quote unquote brands and you think like, oh, these guys really know what they're doing, but they had made all of it up and it was hilarious. And and political and challenging and creative as fuck. Their early merch looked like beer ads and skateboard stickers. Their brand was like pure delinquent energy. Like, I don't know that skateboarding would be what skateboarding is today. Like an Olympic sport had people like the Beastie Boys not just made it cool, but like made it mainstream. In my notes, I've written aesthetic anarchy. They never sold out. They never licensed a single song to commercials. They chose myth over metrics, cult status over mass appeal. Their early merch was intentionally juvenile and like a joke. This seems so normal now, but then doing fake ads like fake junk food, this parody of consumption and marketing. I mean, now we have Meow Wolf that built, a completely fake convenience store in Vegas, and millions of people have gone through it. Like, without the Beastie Boys, I'm not sure that a concept like that would exist in the same way today. They became iconic to the underground, the skaters, the stoners, and the rebels. They were this cross-market brand before that was a thing. They were a youth brand before Hot Topic existed. They refused commercial licensing, and that just didn't exist at the time. We didn't have these streaming music models and social media where you could truly access like mass markets instantly. The only way to really make a lot of money and to put your music in front of international stages was licensing. But no Beastie Boys song was ever sold for ads and advertisements. Not once. But they did put their music in independent films, cult skate videos, grainy bootlegs. They really embraced everything about independent art. And they not only ensured that there was a place and a space and accessibility for creators in that genre, but that's where they put their music as well. Your brand is your vibe, your microcosm, your metaverse. It's its own thriving world. And, now we're using this word regenerative and organic. But then it wasn't about how many followers or how many likes or how many reviews you could get for the Beastie Boys. It was how can we develop this mythos to create this compelling, magical story that people want to be a part of? They didn't build a business for reach or even profitability. They built an identity that whispered to all of the vagrants and the free thinkers and the artists that just never fit in and didn't want to. So, what would the Beastie Boys do? They'd be a sticker on the back of a high school locker because it would have gotten the owner in trouble had they put it on the front. And they wouldn't have worried about a sponsored ad campaign. Now, I think the thing that I always loved about the Beastie Boys, without really knowing this was the thing that I always loved about the Beastie Boys, because obviously it validates one of my calling cards, but it's value-driven growth. Their ethics allowed them to evolve without ever selling out. Adam Yauch, aka MCA, became a Buddhist and an activist. In the 90s, the Beastie Boys were one of the first ever artists to not only publicly apologize for the misogyny and homophobia in some of their early lyrics, they changed their lyrics. They re-released all of their music to correct and evolve their political policies and stances. They used their tours to fundraise for Tibetan freedom, for all sorts of different campaigns that they believed in. They promoted feminism, anti-racism, and minority freedom across the world. And despite growing into this activist ethos, they never lost their edge. Their last albums are still inarguably musical powerhouses, to the Five Boroughs and Hot Sauce Committee being a couple. You can grow and evolve and get old without being corny, without being super cringe. Integrity doesn't cancel cool. It deepens it. So what would the Beastie Boys do? We talk now about like build in public. They evolved their ethics out loud. They recognized this is messy. Growth is messy. Things are changing. We're going to change with it. That's going to create some contradictions and some possible hypocrisies. And we're going to own that. And we're going to do our best to correct it. And we're going to take all of the criticism and feedback that you offer us. And where it feels ethically or morally out of alignment for us, we will show up and we will make the change. And we will do that with you, for you. They made it part of their art. And I think they asked, at least they gave everybody else the opportunity to step up. And I don't know that a lot of artists had that courage. So as per usual, we're at that part of the episode where I hope to give you a few takeaways that you can tactically apply to your day to day. Because it's always easy to look at somebody like the Beastie Boys who have, almost a 30, 40-year career span and think, how could I possibly compare myself or pull anything from what they've done into what I'm doing right now? And I will remind you that they started as 3 punks in New York City in the 80s, which was a fucking war zone. And they did it. They did it by themselves without any support from anything commercially viable. And then the second they got that support, they blew it up anyway. What would the Beastie Boys do? What's some tactical takeaways? When you think about creating your own mythos, and I was having this conversation actually with a listener, you know who you are. There was a Quantum Business Book Club episode about Hero with 1,000 Faces, which is Joseph Campbell's tome on myth making and the common symbols and storylines and the hero's journey being the main thread there of how to build myth, but why myth resonates with humans on such a visceral level. One of the most powerful things you can do in art is that smoke and mirrors, is make believe. So turn your brand, turn your identity, turn your vibe into your business. You know, the Beastie Boys turned their sound into a studio. They built their own creative compound, a Notion board, a home studio, a Discord server. You know, if you have a shop front, or maybe you're just doing pop-ups, maybe you've got a website. This can be your whole world, not a part of someone else's system. Oscilloscope Labs became an indie microcosm, this ecosystem where music, film, words, rebellion, and then eventually a full content hub producing albums, singles, film, zines, vinyl, events, art shows, spoken word performances, festivals. Like, you can turn your vision into a place where anyone who resonates can play, and you all can co-create and test things out and bring your audience into it and build in your public. I think something I certainly have always taken away from the Beastie Boys is the joke, right? Like, not just tell your own story, build the myth, but like, be fucking silly, laugh, make it playful, let your weirdness become your advantage. I mean, I feel like I talk about that in every single dang episode, but have inside jokes be a part of your brand. Make absurd merchandise. Like, one of the very first pieces of merch that wasn't like a t-shirt or an album for one of my bands, we found this website that would kind of let us find some really, really nice, high quality items. And we made a flask with song lyrics on it, which probably doesn't sound that crazy now, but I had never seen anything like that on anyone else's merch table 20, is that accurate? 15 to 20 years ago, right? And they were the most expensive thing we sold, and we could not keep them in stock. And we realized that having really high quality stuff that had lyrics specifically that felt like they worked with that particular piece of merchandise, and we would have 100 of them, and our fans just thought it was the coolest thing in the entire world to be able to buy. Another artist that I work with gets local print artists and screen printers to do their gig posters. So every single show has its own limited edition, numbered, screen printed poster, and people collect them. Some people have collected every single one. I mean, there would be, 1,000 different posters at this point. That's what I'm talking about. Market your madness like it's sacred. Grand Royal Magazine was part satire, part cultural Bible. And it was built during the Beastie Boys' quiet periods. Anytime they kind of disappeared from the touring circuit or from the album circuit, they were working on other creative projects. They never stopped. And not only did it feed the creative beast, but it allowed them to kind of tease out these different side quests in their mythos. Between fake ads and samurai cartoons, gear reviews, studio recommendations, it all became, it helped them make their mark in the spaces they would eventually grow into. They never used data to inform their decision making. And for one reason, like it just didn't exist yet. I mean, obviously data existed, but like when you are a trailblazer, when you are a disruptor, there might not be enough information out there to support what you think is going to work. So all of these creative plays, literally and figuratively speaking, gave them an opportunity to test in real time and, to break it fast, to see how people might respond to it. And it wasn't about, is this going to be popular or is this going to work? It's like, is this joke going to hit? If you've ever seen a comedian working on their bits and testing their material, when they're playing their smaller clubs, those shows are hard to watch. And that is by design, because they're going to take their polished, finalized material. The every word has been crafted. Every sentence has been refined because they know it's going to engage and continue to pull the listener and audience member along and make them laugh. But that doesn't happen by accident. That is many, many nights of performance and refinement and testing. So by purposefully making at least one thing in your business that doesn't make any sense, at least on paper, right? Or, on screen, it gives away your art beyond like a lead magnet strategy. And there's so much freedom in creating for the sake of art. It sounds super corny, but it's like I have so many, I remember artists being like, hey, will you manage me? And blah, blah, blah. And I was like, why? Like, if you bring on a business manager, the expectation is you make enough money, we both get paid, right? Like, let's just be very fucking transparent about what's happening. There is a huge difference between selling your art and making your art. And that's not to get into, my whole definition of like business as taking your art seriously and being willing to put it out there. This is in terms of monetization and what is it that you're going to actually invest in? So you tested it, you've played with it, it's super fun, you're passionate about it. Where to from here? When you start a side project that has no ROI, the meaning of it will outlive your metrics. The monetization becomes the byproduct of your passion. And I mean, you see this all over the art world. Like, well, just to refer back to a previous example with Meow Wolf, they started as parties, but they were so popular, these immersive art events, the initial founder realized there's something here. That's what I'm talking about. It doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to make money. And at some point, you might just create something so playful that you are so passionate about. People literally ask, how can we pay for that? Paul's Boutique used hundreds of obscure samples, many unlicensed, and it bombed commercially until it became a legend. There is a playlist, of course. I mean, I didn't even really know where to start. There's just, I mean, every single one of these is a favorite song of mine. I tried to do some deep cuts. I tried to do some collaborations. I might do what I did with Bowie, which is just include their entire discography at the end of the playlist. I'm super open to all contributions. As with all of these, I mean, it was just absolutely impossible for me to even start to tackle the entire Beastie Boys impact on myself, let alone disruptive creative economies. But I think we got there just in terms of some of the major milestones that were hit. The Beastie Boys didn't just disrupt music. They disrupted what it meant to grow up as an artist without ever giving in. They proved you could be smart and sloppy, that you could be political and hilarious, offensive and ethical, experimental and commercially lethal. They didn't set out to build a brand or have an identity or even be any particular kind of band. But in doing what they did, they created true legacy. And I wonder if you are still listening and still with me. Are you trying to do the same thing? Because if so, this isn't about scaling or posting or performing. This is about building your own legacy. So take what works from existing infrastructure that actually feels supportive for you and throw out the rest. Like sample the system, remix the rules, and then drop something that's 10 years ahead of its time. Because that's what the Beastie Boys would do. Most of me is just like, wow, we really didn't even give them justice. But it would just absolutely be impossible for me to even tackle it. If you liked this one, maybe I'll do an even deeper dive because I didn't get into the individuals. Gosh, they're like early comeuppance, some of the very dramatic personal challenges these guys went through. Gosh, from lightning strikes to terminal illness, RIP. This is one of my all-time lifetime favorites. They will always be. I mean, I would even go so far as to say top 5 artists probably of my lifetime. So anywho, thank you so much for sharing this with me. It was really special, totally overwhelming. Always open to feedback. I would love to hear from you. We've got a lot more, actually. I've had quite a few different suggestions coming in. So my intention is going to be to kind of like do somebody that had been around for a really long time and then one of the newer, more contemporary artists. There's a couple of absolute wild cards in here as well. So I'm excited to keep doing this. Thank you. I'll do it for you. I wouldn't be here without you. So love you.